Also, in the past, disciples retreated to the mountains, to caves, to forests, and monasteries. And sometimes we have people who like that. They are like that. They say, I want to go to the mountains and retreat. I want to see how I can clean myself or create new plans or cry for my sins. Or if I could be in a monastery, I would be better, a better this or that. But today in the future, the place of disciples are in the city, in contact with humanity, in contact with their problems, with their pain, with their suffering. We cannot escape any longer into the caves. That's the future for disciples.
Welcome back to Joshua's Magic, channel about the intersection of the physical or ordinary world and the spiritual or extraordinary world. I'm here with Joleen DuBois. She is the founder and president of the White Mountain Educational Association, and we're going to be having a talk today about the subject of discipleship. So, welcome, Joleen. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me here, Joshua. It's a real pleasure.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, I came across you on YouTube on your channel where you've given a lot of talks, and I was appreciated the quality and the insights you shared. So I thought it'd be great to have you on and talk about some stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a new experience for me to be interviewed, but it's about a subject I'm passionate about.
So the idea of discipleship, what is that exactly? I mean, people have in their heads discipleship, they probably think of like Jesus's disciples.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about, or is there more to it, or is it different? How would you express that idea?
Yeah, it's really, we could probably approach it by saying discipleship from the esoteric point of view. So, as with everything esoteric, there's an exoteric. It's like, I was talking about the other day that when I started as a youngster attending church, they talked to us about, the disciples of Christ. And but that was such a long time ago, 2 or 3 thousand years ago. And as things evolve, discipleship has evolved. And so I really wasn't interested in discipleship until I began studying with the Tibetan Tige and his two books, Discipleship in the New Era. And I went from there to studying and reading about Agni Yoga and what it had to say about discipleship. And then my spiritual teacher, mentor, Torquem Saradarian, spoke at length about discipleship. And so through these many years of focusing and studying and thinking about discipleship, I've discovered it really created a path for me to practice. And so what I wanted to share with today, we share with you and your audience is to talk about discipleship in general and then talk about the uh, past esoteric disciples and the future, what's in the future for those of us that are on this spiritual path that some call the esoteric path.
So you mentioned exoteric or outer discipleship, and then esoteric or sort of inner discipleship. What does that look like? What is the difference there, and what is the yeah?
Yeah, it's putting it real simplistically, the exoteric level of discipleship in today's society would be the religious and the Christian specific Christian religions are focused on discipleship, and they're basically uh, echoing what the Bible taught, so long ago, versus the esoteric, which is always what I believe in. The esoteric is the behind the scenes, the in depth and the cause of, in this case, the practice of discipleship? What's the cause? What's the reason why practice discipleship? And so it evolves as humanity evolves and expands on itself. And then there's a time where we hear a call, an inner call to bring us on to the practice to serving the greater good, which is, in essence, the path of discipleship.
And so discipleship, at least in some of the esoteric writings, is is one stage along the path and can sort of incorporate encompass other stages. But what are you, I guess, what are you before you're a disciple? What is that stage like?
Say again?
What before you become a disciple in the sort of esoteric sense, what are you before that? What is that stage before you step onto the path of
Yeah,
disciple?
I think a person that becomes really discontent with their life, they want to know what is the purpose of life, what is their purpose in life, why am I here? That leads them to a what I call a divine discontent. And in that discontent, they hear an inner call. Eventually, they hear an inner call to be of greater service, to bring their best out, to be able to live the purpose of their life. And and so where, yeah, discipleship is multi-leveled. What I'd like to share with today is not the different stages of discipleship, but how we can practice discipleship. I know in the Tibetan's books, there's many stages from aspirant to the initiate, and on beyond into mastership and so forth. But I was hoping today just to make it uh, practical in a way that we understand that there are tests and trials that accompany the path of discipleship, that strengthens us, that makes us more courageous and more inclusive and more what I call otherness rather than selfishness.
Mm, more altruistic. Yeah.
So it's like what I've coined a phrase is that disciples are self-born. They produce themselves. And with everything that I wanted to share today, this is what I would say as a takeaway to what a disciple is, and that is that they are self-born and they produce themselves. Like in the past, if you worshiped a master, you became a disciple. But in the new age, disciples are those who are working on themselves. They take their life into their hands and they chisel it with striving and self-exertion. So again, taking the phrase that a disciple or disciples are self-born, they produce themselves through self-striving and exertion. So it's not just worshiping a master or worshiping someone or something. It is really finding your station, your position in your life, and striving to become better and better and better. And it takes self-exertion to do that.
So in the past, the disciple was a disciple of a master or a guru. What would you say the disciple is a disciple of currently in the current thinking on it?
Commitment to light, to bring light into the darkness. And the way we do that is through one's talents. And you could always determine a disciple as being multi-talented, engaged in service, dedicating themselves to serving the greater good. So if you are a disciple, you are a torchbearer. In other words, one who brings the teaching into the world. And the teaching can be defined as the formulation of light, the formulation of light. So disciples are multi-talented, they're very service-oriented, and they're dedicated to serving the greater good.
So you mentioned that you wanted to talk about the sort of tests and trials. What sort of tests and trials are? I guess it's different today than it was in the past. But yeah, for today, what sort of tests and trials would people stepping onto the path of discipleship encounter?
Well, first of all, think about this, is that essentially discipleship is a path to becoming our true self, the capital S self, the true self, which is the process of changing from being the not self to becoming the true self, that capital S self. In other words, from the unreal to the real. So the question is, how do we move from the lower self to the capital S self, from the unreal to the real, and live a life of reality? It typically, not 100% of the time, but typically we experience a shock. For example, like you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness and you survived that terminal illness, or you experienced the loss of someone that was close to you, or like I said earlier, you experience this deep, real deep discontent with your own life. These serve as what I call a shock. And through this shock, you learn reality. Death is a reality. This terminal illness was a reality, but I survived it. The loss of someone I cared very dear about, like my son died 2 or 3 years ago suddenly.
Oh, I'm
That,
sorry to hear that.
yeah, it was a shock. And these shocks, it's like push us into living a life of what is real versus what is unreal. And that leads us and puts us on the path to discipleship today. So discipleship is about self-actualization, that capital S self-actualization. It's about experience, it's about application, and it's about striving. And so in this process of the shock, hearing the inner call, recognizing that a disciple is self-born and they produce themselves, it's going to take more than one lifetime. So as we put ourselves on this path of discipleship and we begin to strive and experience what we call in Agni Yoga, the path to self-perfection, it takes more than one life to reach a point of self-mastery. But now our life has changed. You know, we're no longer wasting our time and we're a more otherness kind of person than self-centered.
Yeah, it's a tough process and usually a slower process than most people would hope for.
Yeah,
Uh,
you're so right. You're so
yeah.
right.
Yeah, I mean, because you're shifting out of, like you say, the sort of self-centered consciousness that's focused on, I want this or that, and it might not even be so gross, like, sexual opportunities or food or things like that. It could be more refined, like you're really attached to certain ideas and certain ways of feeling about things, but those are often just outer stumbling blocks too. And to sort of move from all those attachments to the consciousness of the soul or the true self or whatever one might call it is it's
Yeah,
a lot of effort.
it's like what you're saying is in the process of being caught in the web of the day-to-day life of mass consciousness, we have to experience it, but we have to learn how not to lose ourselves in these various situations, our emotions, reactions, difficulties, failures. and successes, we have to learn how, as a disciple, not to lose ourselves. So we eventually learn over time that all of these situations, from the most difficult to the most positive, becomes the process of enlightenment. And in this process, we eventually find our true self.
Yeah, one thing for me in particular that I'm slowly adjusting on is uh, something along the lines of being versus doing. There's value in focusing on specific tasks and, outward sort of things like that, whether it's with objects or people. But the inner quality of it, focusing on that, that's kind of a shift. I remember I mean I haven't looked into this, but I remember there was some story about from the Quran when Muhammad and his people were fighting the pagans in that time period, that one of his sons or lieutenants or something, he was fighting a guy, and the guy he was about to beat him, and he like spit in his face or he threw sand at him or something, and he got angry, and then he walked away, and somebody else asked him, he was like, why, you're about to win, why did you walk away? And he said, because I let him make me angry, right? And whatever happened historically with that, I don't know, but the essence of it, of your inner state is something that's sometimes more important than the outer consequences of what's going on.
Sure. It's like in finding our true self that the disciple finds itself in others. So
Hmm.
we can bypass our differences.
Yeah. You have to find the soul within yourself to be able to see it in others.
Exactly. And eventually becoming one with all. Not to lose our individuality, but it's like we integrate ourselves in a loving way, in a heart-oriented way, accepting our differences, but recognizing our inner strength, our commonalities, and our oneness. So, but that's not easy, and you know that. It's like we see that in today's society, but that's why we need disciples in the world today. Like at the end of World War II, we moved from having 2,000 disciples in the world to hundreds of thousands of disciples in the world, because what the shock brought to them through World War II woke them up to what is real and what is unreal.
Hmm.
So we learn over the centuries of incarnations to become all giving and all love.
And then there's sort of outer things that condition the inner life, like planetary events, like you're talking about. So yeah, I mean, and I think discipleship, part of it is balancing those two things. Like you have to have an awareness of what's going on in the world to be able to effectively serve, and also that inner awareness of the soul or a sort of deeper consciousness. And if you're missing one or the other, it's at best it's lacking something.
Exactly. So go back to the idea that a disciple is a bearer of light. And so this calls us to task. If we recognize in ourselves that we are on this path of discipleship, at whatever stage of discipleship it is, we want to accept and take responsibility that we are bringing light into the darkness. And this is where a disciple is self-born and how they produce themselves. So let's say that they have this particular disciple has only 5% illumination. This is the amount of light that that disciple is going to carry to others. But if the disciple has a 50% illumination, obviously this is the amount they're going to bring to others through their service, through their creative labor and so forth. So the amount of light that the disciple bears is the amount of light with which they're going to illuminate humanity. If you're a disciple, as a disciple, the closer you are to your true self, the greater your illumination. So again, if let's say you've actualized 5% of yourself, this is the level, and there's the stages we were referring to earlier, the state without defining the stages, is that if you have actualized 5% of yourself, this is the level of your discipleship, no matter who we tell people we are, no matter what position we hold in the world, what degrees we have acquired, or what possessions we have accumulated, we are still only 5% real. So one who's committed to the path of discipleship, this is what makes one of the points of discipleship difficult, is that we're not concerned with what people think in thinking that our life may be a bit odd. It's like, I know a group I used to be very involved with and gave all my time and service to them. I would attend classes, I would give lectures for them, teach classes and so forth. And I did it without being paid. And my friends would say, that's so odd. Why are you spending all your time giving, giving away who you are? Don't they want to pay you? But the irony is that's not the point. It is bringing the light of others out of themselves, bringing their own capitalist self, if you will, their divinity out into the life. And that's more important than being paid. So we're not concerned with people thinking that our life is odd. We stay on course. We focus on our spiritual labor. And even though maintaining the status is not our goal, we don't doubt our path or the purpose. And this is where what drew me to want to be with you in this interview today is that we don't doubt the existence of higher realms. We don't doubt the existence of the super mundane, because discipleship, as we as we bring out more and more of that light, that essence within ourselves, we ascend into more refined elements of life itself, takes our consciousness into the super mundane. So the super mundane, or the higher realms, are as real to us as banking is to the average person. It's very real.
Well, even more real because this world, it said, is sort of a dim reflection of the deeper worlds in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. So it's the light of the path which pulls us out of darkness, pulls the disciple out of darkness. I was thinking how Abraham Lincoln, Walt Whitman, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Eleanor Roosevelt. I've been listening to some documentaries about Theodore Roosevelt, and then about the Eleanor and Franklin themselves. So I wanted to put Eleanor Roosevelt in my list along with Frederick Douglass. These are disciples. Their speeches will ring out clear and true for centuries and centuries, because they reflected honest, sincere communication. And this is another sign of a disciple. In the world of discipleship, it is vital for us to mean what we say and to say what we mean.
Yeah, a lot of people have problem with honesty, unfortunately, and I don't think that's anything new. But I don't know, it just seems to be kind of accepted that it's okay to lie about things at times.
These,
Yeah, even among spiritual people. And it's so kind of bizarre, to me anyway, because I'm very much against lying and stuff. And it's like, well, if it's a really unimportant thing, then you shouldn't sully yourself with lying. And if it's really important most of the time, then you really need to tell the truth about it. And now the only exceptions I can think are like, you're hiding people from the Nazis in your basement, like in some really extreme situation, then maybe, you know, but even then, even when you do that, you're still putting some darkness on your soul. It might be more important that, you're saving those people, but you're putting at least a little bit of darkness on it with the lie or the untruth.
Okay. That's an interesting way to think about it. What a situation to put
Yeah.
ourselves in.
I mean,
Okay.
and if you can tell the truth in that situation without lying somehow and still protect those people, that's the ideal if you can manage it, I think.
Right. So the point about discipleship is about striving. Like I said, striving and self-exertion, the recognition that a disciple is self-born. Um, so disciple is about striving upward, let's say upward in a spiral fashion, living a life. On the other hand, living a life in a parallel movement, a movement that is like singularly parallel, that's what keeps a person moving back and forth on the same level. Such a person's going to stay ordinary. They've not yet responded to an inner call of that divine nature, and so they live an ordinary life. So that's not to separate the disciple is better than one who's living the ordinary life, but it is showing the difference between an illumined one and one that is not yet illumined. In other words, is not heard or responded to the call of discipleship. So the one who hears the call and responds, then that parallel movement changes into a spiral course. Striving in beauty on the path takes one to the goal. The movement, like you mentioned, it's slow. It should not be rushed or artificially induced, or it's going to push you to the top without a real foundation, and your tower's going to fall.
Hmm. So to touch on what you said there, the parallel movement is like somebody in the world who goes back and forth from pain or pleasure or from duties to what they're seeking after, whatever. But that's the sort of the parallel. And then the spiral is slowly sort of growing and encompassing more in your consciousness. Was that the good way to put it?
Instead of back and forth,
Mm,
you're refining yourself, right? This refinement is the release of more and more light from within. Whereas the one that is living the more ordinary life tends to be coarse, um, self-centered, unaware. They just haven't heard that call yet. So let me share some points about the past discipleship and future discipleship and see where that takes us. So, okay, so I've got some notes that I'm going to refer to here. Where in the past, discipleship was dedicated to the discipline of our physical, emotional, mental bodies, and also, interestingly enough, to the power of memorizing. It's like people in various religions, even in the esoteric community, they love to memorize page after page after page of their holy books, but they're not assimilating what they're memorizing. Memorizing is okay, but the past was just memorize and then reiterate what you have memorized, and it's superficial. Whereas future disciples, those who are entering the path now and building upon their and releasing that more and more, that divinity, that divine self within, they're interested in the higher mind, intuition, building the bridge between the lower and the higher. They accept the former disciplines, such as, disciplining our body, emotions, and mind. We have to accept that, but the emphasis is on increasing the function of our higher mind and connecting that mind with our higher mind with our intuitional plane. So this is hard work. the New Age disciple has a greater task in front of us. If we're only occupied with disciplining our physical, emotional, and mental bodies, now we're going to be age-old disciples because it creates self-centeredness. It is like the bodybuilder that goes to the gym for 3, 4, 5 hours a day. They're going to have a strong physical body, but just like hatha yoga, it anchors their spirit to their physical body and distracts them to such a point that they're no longer visionaries, and it keeps them in the old age. It prevents them from even recognizing that they have a higher nature, that higher mind, that intuition. So, what is intuition? Intuition is beyond our mind. And here's my definition of intuition. It's just one definition. It is simultaneous, all-inclusive understanding of events, problems, and ideas. So that's intuition. And then the higher mind. So there's a difference between intuition and the higher mind. The higher mind, I just love this. This is from Agni Yoga, where the master talks about straight knowledge. Straight knowledge is found just woven in between the different 13, 14 books of Agni Yoga series. And Helena Roerich talked a lot about straight knowledge. So the question is, what is straight knowledge? And this is what I've determined from experience, and that is that straight knowledge is whatever you need to know, your higher mind presents it. So the higher mind is a very advanced mechanism. So for example, if your higher mind is operating, ideally, you do not need to sit and think too much or even research too much, because the higher mind has all these things. It's like you push this button and it comes like a computer. So sometimes we've had these experiences where, like, when we are thinking about something and the answer comes. So that's the higher mind. That's not intuition. It's straight knowledge that's coming from the higher mind. And then you have the Antahkarana. I know you know these things, Joshua, but let me share from my point of
Oh, of
view.
course. This is for the audience, not for me necessarily.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So we have the higher mind, we have straight knowledge, we have intuition, then we have the Antahkarana. And I know one of your interviews included talking about the Antahkarana.
Oh yeah, with Michael Linfield. Yeah.
Dear Michael, dear Michael. So this is my short take on the Antahkarana, how the effects of having built the Antahkarana is. And the Antahkarana, having built it, is the power to remember your contacts, not just emotional, mental, spiritual, and higher levels, but when you are in a waking consciousness. So, for example, let us say that you were sleeping and you did something in the higher realms. Well, most people don't remember because they don't have the Antahkarana bridge built yet. But if that bridge is built, we remember when we go to the inner plane schools. We remember what is said. We have meetings with the master. We have meetings with the advanced students or initiates of the master. And we bring that memory into our working life, which finds us with deeper and deeper visions and puts us more in contact with the plan of humanity.
I wanted to touch on that. I thought you brought up an interesting concept there that's probably not that widely understood. Um, and that's the idea that when you're asleep, oftentimes, assuming you're on the path to at least some degree, you'll often get these kind of classes from, maybe it's not even a master, maybe it's like a disciple who's higher than you on the path.
Sure.
But yeah, you'll be taught, at least on like the level of a soul or something like that, these lessons. And to bring those into your daily consciousness and waking life, that's part of the goal. And people might have an experience of this, but you're one way, and maybe you're even sort of gloomy and things don't look too bright. And then you go to sleep, and the next day there's all these other sort of possibilities open up to your consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times it has to do with those sort of spiritual classes you receive, where your soul gets a little bit more instruction, and then you're able to look at things a little bit differently. You don't know why, because you just woke up and now it's sort of changed, at least to some degree.
And it can even be more specific, and not all of our dreams are that specific, but I was thinking about I've had two really strong experiences back in the day. And the first experience was in a dream life meeting a person that I later met physically.
Hmm.
But dream I met with this person and we sat in a beautiful room with a fireplace. It was a very small room, sort of like my office here. And we had this conversation and he said, "It is time for you to become an ordained minister." I said, "What?" "What do you mean, an ordained minister?" "Because this is your path." And then this beautiful being gave me an outline of what the rest of my life would be. And so,
How detailed was it?
pardon me,
How detailed was the outline?
it was pretty detailed.
Really?
Detailed in as much that it was for the rest of my life, but it was more like, writing an outline where you had to fill in the blanks. This
I
is
see.
how I had to
So,
determine how
so
I
not
wanted.
down to the level of, and on Sunday you're going to go to the store and pick up milk and bread, and not that detailed.
Not that detailed, exactly. Yeah, and then my husband had a dream experience in which he was told to quit his job and to do something else, and he did it and became very successful. So these are classes that and dreams that we can experience that people just, well, they have different reactions to such dreams. It's like the difference between a superficial dream that's just chaotic and you can't remember half of the dream and the other half didn't make any sense anyway, to, real dreams like this. And then there was another dream I had where I met my teacher and spiritual teacher. And that was like 2 years before I met him in person.
Hmm.
When I met him in person, I remember I was at a conference that he was speaking at, and there were a lot of people there, and there was no chairs left. So I was in the back of the room, sitting on the floor, and he stood up. He was a short guy, and he stood up and he pointed his finger. He said, "I know who you are. We were together in a dream 2 years ago. I want," and you can imagine. I just
Wonderful.
felt it. I just felt it. It was so, yeah, these
And
are,
did you know it was him before he said that?
I did. The minute I walked into that room, I recognized him.
Hmm. Interesting.
And I stayed with him for 17 years until he died.
And that was Torquem Saradirian? Is that
What?
was his name? Yeah.
Yeah, Torquem Saradirian. He was an Armenian that moved to the United States when he was young. And when he was in Armenia, he was studying with Alice Bailey. And his teacher told him to move to the United States and to start a center. Uh, and he did. I really don't remember now if he was still studying with Alice Bailey then or not, but he probably was. But his task at that time was to build his own group. But he studied with Alice Bailey as a youngster.
Hmm. Interesting. Got that connection there. That connection thing is sort of interesting. That it's not just reading. There's sort of two ways to go about. There's, like you say, being self-formed, but then at times there's also sort of the connection you get from other more advanced people on the path that kind of stimulate you and help unfold.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's phenomena that takes place. It's like when I had a meeting with him that same first time that I met with him. He asked for a private time with him, and I went home and took a shower, and the water that came on me was like an electrical charge. Literally, I could feel the pulsation of electricity going through me, and it was the light coming from him. I know this sounds really odd, but it was so real. And that's what these illumined beings give to us in ways that there's the word shock again, that creates a shock that brings forth more of our true self than what would have been available to us had we not had that opportunity to be with such an illumined person.
And that's, I think, that's part of what disciples can do for others, at least some of the time, and depending on your measure of light, is that you yourself can then be a reflector to that inner light or that higher light for people who aren't quite as advanced as you are. And sometimes even people that are on your level are more advanced, but they're advanced in one direction and maybe you're advanced in another direction. And you're able to provide the light or the love from where you're at, and that helps them in a way that they maybe haven't fully developed yet either.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to talk about, because I know we had mentioned it, it has to do with unity and how disciples in the past had separate religions, separate dogmas, separate doctrines. A disciple worshiped that master, that religion, that dogma, that doctrine.
Yeah.
And they were very, very firm that each disciple kept their own dogma, their own doctrines. And if they didn't, they were going to go to hell. Well, that's the past. The future, starting right now, disciples are all inclusive. For us, there is no just one exclusive religion. There is only one religion, which is the relationship between a human and God. We're not interested in doctrines and dogmas, but only interested in the spirit of religion. Still, we know how many millions of disciples are still interested only in their path, their religion, their only way to fly. So
And,
there's
and there's value in that, but you have to have the awareness that there's more than that, and that's not the only spiritual path, you know.
well, this is what I've found for myself as I've studied with various paths, and not superficially, but very deeply, and ultimately chose initially, uh, like I was saying, talking about discipleship and the Tibetan and his teachings, until I then went into studying um, the Agni Yoga. And so knowing about, I mean, I know the difference between Agni Yoga and the Tibetan teachings. I know them well, but my path is Agni Yoga, but not, for my own practice. But I'm not separate from the Tibetan's teachings. I'm not separate from Christianity. I'm not separate from Judaism. I'm not separate from Buddhism, although I tend to align more with Buddhism and Theosophy, than others. So we're inclusive. So our approach to religion is the spirit of religion, and that's what makes us inclusive, knowing that they're all from one source, right?
Yeah. And that's sort of what the Tibetan was saying about the new world of religion. There's sort of this dark idea of the new world religion being this sort of totalitarian thing that everybody has to conform to. But the way he was talking about it was rather than a set of doctrines and dogmas and separate things, it would be a shared understanding of experience, right? Of spiritual experience and a knowledge to some degree of the reality there. And so when you're into Agni Yoga and then you talk with somebody who's a Sufi or something, and you have some rapport because there's some shared understanding there. That's the sort of new world religion, not the sort of totalitarian ideology that everybody has to follow, but a connection on a deeper level and an understanding of the reality, not just the doctrines and dogmas, how things are supposed to be.
Exactly, exactly. Also, disciples are going to be devoted to the plan of the hierarchy. In other words, the plan is more important than any individual. For example, an engineer is not too important, but the blueprint is important because from the blueprint, the engineer is going to build. Uh, we follow the plan that initiates and masters created, and we bring that plan forward according to the needs of humanity. Also, in the past, disciples retreated to the mountains, to caves, to forests, and monasteries. And sometimes we have people who like that. They are like that. They say, I want to go to the mountains and retreat. I want to see how I can clean myself or create new plans or cry for my sins. Or if I could be in a monastery, I would be better, a better this or that. But this is the deal. When I went to Mongolia and I went to India, and when I was in India, I had a wonderful guide who took me on the to various locations that Nicholas and Joleen Roerich lived and experienced and wrote about. And we found this cave. And to get to the cave, you have to cross a very rickety bridge, which was written about in his book, one of Nicholas Roerich's books. So we got to the cave, went inside. It was a huge, huge cave. And it took us away. We went from going into the cave to going up, 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 up. We went up the steps that were formulated, out of the cave, and finally went to the very end of this cave, which was by this time it was very, very narrow. And this is a place where women are not allowed. It is a location within the cave where monks come to meditate once a year at the full moon time of Taurus or the Vesak. And so I just, the guy that was with me knew me and he said, come on, we're going to go in here. What I discovered was there's this big boulder that had a painting that I had discovered and found that was a painting of Nicholas Roerich. And this was one of the paintings that is called The Commander, which you can find, in his many thousands of paintings. So I had to crawl on my stomach to get into this area. But this is my point. If you've ever been in one of these caves with I don't know, was it the droppings of bats? The cave is humid, it is dank, it is dark. It is not a place you want to retreat to, except perhaps that little section of the cave that my guide let me go into and experience. But you couldn't stand, you had to sit, and there's only room for one person. So only the monks, these specialized monks, are allowed to go once a year, and they congregate in the larger part of the cave. And then the lama, the head lama, is the one that goes into that smaller area. But you can imagine my surprise of seeing this boulder, this instrumental boulder, which I really can't talk about. It's significant, but I knew it was significant when I found this painting that Nicholas Roerich had painted on that boulder, so I knew he was there. But we don't go to caves like that anymore. We take a week off or 2 weeks off and go to the forest and balance ourselves and meditate. But today, in the future, the place of disciples are in the city, in contact with humanity, in contact with their problems, with their pain, with their suffering. We cannot escape any longer into the caves. That's the future for disciples. We're going to stay with the problems, with the mess, with the pain and suffering of the people. So who cares when we are seeing all of these things and escaping to the mountains to save ourselves? So they're not in touch. So that was the old age disciple, and we have lots of them. As soon as they encounter problems, they escape. Immediately, when they see the pain and suffering of humanity, they say that's their problem. Let me escape. And the question is, then why did you become a disciple? So discipleship in the future is to stay wherever there is a job for us, or we create the job for ourselves so that we become what I call a transforming agent in society. So we live with the people and see how we can meet their needs and how we can contribute to their advancement. And just like what you are doing by bringing these interviews up on YouTube for others to find, showing.
You're trying to take the esoteric and bring it outward. And I think that's part of the process of the externalization of the spiritual hierarchy. You know, it's
Exactly.
said in ancient times in Atlantis, the masters withdrew from humanity. And since then, humanity's kind of been doing its own thing, so to speak. But the plan is that the masters will once again walk with humanity. You know, if you imagine somebody like Jesus or Buddha actually in the world in some fashion, and we as disciples have to be sort of the vanguard of that. We have to be bringing as much light, as much love as we can into humanity, and that's sort of I guess, the forerunner process to that.
Yeah, whatever degree our light is in expression. So, but the point is we no longer retreat into the monasteries and the caves, but stay with humanity.
Or at least not permanently. Like you said, sometimes you go on a retreat or something like that.
Of course, of course.
And
So
and yeah, just a thought. I mean, for some people, it might still be the right thing to do. You know, especially if they're very outwardly focused, their path might be to get out of things for a while and shift their consciousness, and then they can come back and be of more true service.
okay.
And consequently, I think if people, like you said before, if they love going on retreats and staying away, maybe their task is to come out more and more into the external world and create that kind of balance.
So another thing is in the past, disciples forced their beliefs on others. Again, I'm talking about the old disciple, the old-fashioned disciples, the disciples of the past. Uh, Disciples in the past forced their beliefs on others. That was 2 to 3,000 years ago, but some still use that method. What is that method? The method is to force your beliefs on others with fanaticism. It's like my husband and I, one day we traveled to, I think it was Tennessee, where my husband's brother and sister-in-law lived. And we were out in their front yard and having some tea. And the sister-in-law came over and said, "Will you come into my house? I wanted to talk with you." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I looked at my husband, and I said, "Okay, I'll be back." And I knew something was up. So I went into their house. She took me into their den, locked the door behind us, pulled out the New Testament with the red letters, and said, "I'm going to save you. But first, you have to read the red letters." So I read the red letters, looking at the door that was locked, finished reading, and she said, "Now I'm going to bless you and save you," which she blessed me and saved me. And I said, "Now tell me, what does this mean?" I said, "What do I have to do to earn this?" She says, "Nothing. I've just saved you." So I took a deep breath and I said, "Okay, let's thank you very much. I want to go back outside." That's fanaticism. See, I can sell that, let's share that story now because neither one of them are with us any longer. They passed a few years ago, but that was quite an experience to go through. And We went outside and I got my husband.
I'm going to tie you and put you in this cell in my basement so that you'll be saved.
Exactly. Well said. So in the future, disciples are going to strive to evoke the light, the love, the sacrificial will that's latent within every human being. We evoke it, we bring it out like a midwife who works to help to birth a child. The real genius, the real love, the real sacrificial will, the light that is within others and in ourselves must be brought out.
Yeah, I think, and people have a sort of distorted view of some of these values. They think like if you believe a certain sentence or you say a certain set of words, that's really important. Um, but the real thing that saves you, in a sense, is transforming your consciousness. And people get really attached to these, sentences and think that's the end of it, like do you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? And you say yes, and it's like, well, stamp the paper. Now you're going to heaven. And
Right.
like it doesn't, and even I'm not sure if this was Jesus or it was the Old Testament offhand, but the letter killeth and the spirit giveth life. I mean, that's black and white in the Bible. And if you're going by the letter all the time, you're probably missing out on the spirit, which is the thing that actually gives life.
Yeah, good point. So this is something interesting I wanted to talk about fear.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
How in the past, disciples lived in secrecy because of fear. And the reason I'm bringing this out is because in Agni Yoga, Agni Yoga was given birth to by Nicholas and Helena Roerich, both Russian born. And so the Russian spiritual contingency, were very interested in learning about what is Agni Yoga. And Agni Yoga was brought into the world in 1920. Imagine back then, 1920. And this is what happened.
More than 100 years ago now.
Yeah, more than 100 years ago. And so as the transmissions, they're handwritten down by the first book, which is called The Call, by the way, was handwritten by Nicholas Rourke. And then over 100 pages, and then they hand wrote it. Then they took those handwritten pages and passed them out to 25 or 35 of these students, brand new, to learn what Agni Yoga was. And they would meet together in caves. They would meet together in secret rooms. They would go to, uh, secret places where they would lock the door and discuss these beautiful teachings, but they were so afraid because they would lose their lives, and some would and did lose their lives. And so that was a problem for many, many years in Russia and studying Agni Yoga. And they still go into that periodically, Agni Yoga students, where they are forced to go into secrecy to study what is so meaningful to them, or they will be in trouble with the government. So there are times when the disciples were forced because of fear to live in fear of their life or what they believed in. But as time is moving forward, I can remember now, I don't, rarely do I put on the stops about what my belief system is, how much I love these teachings. Uh, but it didn't used to be like that. It's like when I moved to Prescott, Arizona, which is where I live. And when I first moved here, I had my home renovated, and different Christian servicemen, electricians, and so forth would come in to help renovate the house. And when they saw my books, one young man who brought his son with him said, "Where's your Bible?" And I said, "Here's the Bible right here. This is the Lhasa Bible. It's by George Lhasa." "No, that's not a Bible. That's not a true Bible. If you're not a Christian, we cannot work on your house." And they walked right away. And I could have kept,
'Cause you remember that part in the Bible where Jesus said, don't help people if they're not Christian.
yeah, see, so the point was, maybe years ago, I would have just kept quiet and I would have hidden my books and my pictures and so forth, but I don't do that anymore. You become more and more confident in who you are, in your light, in the teachings, in your discipleship, and you go for it.
Yeah. Well, and people that hide their light, not just in the way that you're speaking, but in all sorts of other ways, you're you're allowing something else to take that place. And and when you don't shine your light, whether it's speaking up about something at work or, that this is your philosophy or your values or whatever, it's important, even if it's not like a super spiritual thing, but it's you and it's not, harmful to other people, that you're making your voice heard to an appropriate degree and being counted because somebody else is taking up that space, and that might not be a good thing.
Right, right.
Yeah, so it's like, you weren't harming anybody with the symbols or books you had around your house. And if they were gonna, get upset about it, then that was on them, sort of that. But like you say, courage is a pretty tough virtue, especially for people on some of the rays to learn. But it's very necessary.
Well, people they have a lot of fear in them. And I was thinking how our building, White Mountains building called Izvara, 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 which means the mountain of God. It was also the name of the piece of real estate that the Roerichs lived on, the boy did when he was growing up. So we called our sanctuary, our property, Izvara, and in the sanctuary, we have hanging a beautiful picture of the banner of peace and culture, which was a pact based on this pact that nearly won Nicholas Roerich a Nobel Peace Prize. And so we have that hanging. And there was a wedding that took place in the sanctuary. And so there are people coming into the sanctuary that are not familiar with that symbol. And this one fellow came up. Granted, he was drinking, so he was not in the best of behavior. And he saw that banner and he says, "You're evil. What are you doing? What is that thing that's hanging up? You're evil." And he ran out of the building. He didn't even ask what it was. And the rest of us just sat there, really surprised, needless to say. But he was afraid. He was afraid because the banner is, three circles within a greater circle, and the circles are all red and the background is white. All you have to do is sit and look at it and know it's an ancient symbol. But people who are fearful will run, and they will automatically deduce that it is something evil or dark and to run from, not knowing the beauty behind that symbol. So it was one other thing I wanted to talk about was the law of synthesis.
All right. I love synthesis. I used to
Oh,
have a show on this channel or a series called Synthesis Chat, and it wasn't as good as later videos, but yeah, me and this friend, we would sort of synthesize ideas. So yeah, synthesis is an important concept and one I focus on from time to time on the channel. So yeah, let's talk about
okay,
synthesis.
so this is just a short point, but because I know we're about out, at least I'm about out of time here, that in the future, disciples will try to actualize in their lives the law of synthesis. So what is the law of synthesis? And this is a very simplistic definition. It is the law of synthesis is to bring that piece of the jigsaw puzzle from there, a piece from here, one from there, one from another place, and unite them and find out what kind of picture it is. That is synthesis. So it is like taking all the different religions in the world, putting them together, uniting them, and finding that golden thread that ties them all together. That's synthesis. In the books of Agni Yoga, the Master Morya says, compare the streams of the teachings of life which have been given to humanity, each without affecting the preceding, discloses new gates to knowledge. The enduring realities of life are fundamental to each given teaching.
Yeah, it's important to be able to synthesize and step past dogma and see the bigger picture there.
Yeah, and to build upon one another.
Yeah. Because if you're in your silo and somebody's in their silo, you could potentially build something greater than the both of you. But you gotta be willing to step out of your silo to some degree.
Exactly.
Well, do you want to move on to the final question, Jolene?
Sure.
All right. So we briefly touched on the plan earlier, but the final question I asked people in the Ageless Wisdom teachings is what facet or aspect of the plan do you sense needs more light shown upon it? What would you like to call people's attention to as part of the plan?
Well, that's a serious question, obviously. And I didn't really remember that question until you just asking it again. I know you mentioned it to me when we first talked, and then I immediately forgot about what the question was. So spontaneously thinking in terms of answering the question, I really think the aspect of the plan that's an important aspect of the plan is synthesis, is the law of synthesis. And that was the key word that came out of the conclave meeting of the great ones, is that the key note for the coming 100 years is synthesis. So it's like I was saying, with the pieces of the puzzle, of taking this piece and that and so forth. It's like taking this culture, that nation, that language, that culture, that language, that nation, and finding the commonality and bringing them together, not to lose their individuality, but to harmonize their individualities, to harmonize the nationalities. And it's like unity, unity, unity.
Did you have some insight into the conclave that's supposed to either have happened or will happen this year? Is that what you were hinting
That
at there?
just that it's synthesis, the law of synthesis
Mm.
and transformation.
So you had an experience where it was communicated to you that those are sort of the important things that the hierarchies
Yeah,
focus on.
this is what I'm intuiting
Mhm.
is synthesis and transformation.
All right.
One
Well,
will
good
give
stuff.
the other. Yeah.
Sorry, what were you saying?
One will give way to the other. You can't have synthesis without transformation, in other words.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, that's great food for thought, everyone. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it and consider sharing it if you think these ideas are worth reaching more people. And subscribe if you haven't done so and you want to see more interviews with interesting people. Well, thanks for coming on, Jolene. Where can people find you if they want to find out more about your work?
Um, they can go to our website, White Mountain Education Association, or WMEA. And that website has a lot of information. It will take you to our YouTube, where you can find, about 450 lectures that I've given. We have manuscripts on Agni Yoga, glossaries, a lot of Agni Yoga material for free to use in your studies. and lectures and so forth. So that's where I would suggest people
All
go.
right. We'll have links to the website there and to the YouTube channel. Make sure to go ahead and check those out. Thanks everybody for watching. Until next time, may the force be with you.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.